Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Kelly Starrett.
And I'm Juliette Starrett.
And you're listening to the Ready State Podcast.
You got it. You better stop it.
This episode of the Ready State Podcast is brought to you by our friends at LMNT, Element.
So we just went on a big family trip to Norway and Germany where we did a ton of hiking.
Yeah, I would describe it as a hiking vacation.
It was a hiking vacation. Like we hiked like 8 out of the 10 days we were gone.
Ask our 15-year-old.
Yeah, and one of the things we really relied on to survive these huge hikes, and I'm talking like we hiked between 10 and 14 miles a day, was Element. And our kids did as well.
Yeah, it's easy. These packets are easy to pack. And then, you're not worried about sugar. You're not worried about carbohydrate. We made sandwiches and things on the road, but having that nutrition, hydration part separated was great. And what a difference. I'm a sweater. I'm a Spitzer.
And also, we came into it being totally jet lagged and probably a little bit dehydrated. So to just hit the ground doing these huge hikes and know that we could just be replenishing ourselves with Element was really clutch.
Not to mention a little bit of Nordic sauna that happened, and you got to replace those electrolytes after the sauna.
So as you guys all know, we literally drink Element every day. Right now, if you order through our link, you get a free sample pack with all of Element's flavors. Go to drinkelement.com/TRS. This episode of the Ready State Podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Vitruvian.
Vitruvian was an interesting thing that came. I saw it on the internet. I saw some of my athlete friends using it. And imagine a force plate that has a couple cables. And traditionally when I see those things, I'm like, it's not serious because I can't put enough heavy load in it. And it just is kind of a one-trick pony. However, this thing kicked my butt. You can deadlift over 400 pounds on it. You can do eccentric only loading on it. And what I really liked about it, it's very quick to set up. Our kids loved it.
Yeah, and for my part, one of the things I loved about it is not only quick to set up, but it's also really small and really easy to store. So it's not some gigantic piece of gym equipment that takes over our entire life for our living room.
Inside the garage for many, many weeks. And you'd be like, hey, could you fold that up, put it next? And you do. You just flip it up and it slides away. Yeah. A straight bar comes with it. You can put crazy handles on it. I sometimes leave it up, and one of the things that we discovered, George's boyfriend liked to get a pump on it. It has a pump setting. The pump plus blood flow restriction, the most ripping pump you've ever had. This thing is so cool.
If you want to learn more about the Vitruvian, go to thereadystate.com/Vitruvian. On this episode of the Ready State Podcast, we are stoked to welcome Josh Appel. Josh is an emergency medicine physician and chief of emergency medicine at the Southern Arizona VA. He is a former Air Force Pararescue Specialist, a PJ, who deployed on the rescue recovery missions for Operation Red Wings, including lone survivor Marcus Luttrell and Lieutenant Michael Murphy. Working with the Murphy family, Josh founded the Memorial Day Murph tradition. Josh is a husband, father of 3 active girls, a teacher, mentor, and a wellness evangelist.
I am so thrilled to have Josh on. I first met Josh officially when we went out to work with his pararescue squadron, who was really thinking about strength and conditioning for the first time. And then, like 2 Cheerios and a big bowl of milk, punk, we found each other.
Yeah, one of the things I loved about this conversation was hearing more about his creation of the Memorial Day Murph tradition. The origin story of that, I had actually forgotten that he was the one who really popularized it. And then obviously it's taken off and, tens of thousands of people do it every Memorial Day. And it's a really cool tradition that all started with Josh. Josh,
and we didn't talk about this, but Josh and I have been collaborating on like off the books projects for a long time. One of them was that we used an H-wave sort of off-brand in the emergency room to treat snake bite wounds. Suddenly he was like, hey, what if we dilute this venom? Josh is cutting edge and all things. He's a tremendous, tremendous human being. We're thrilled to introduce you and the greater Ready State community to our amazing friend, Josh Appel.
What is the good word, Josh? Welcome to the Ready State Podcast.
Good morning, you two. Fantastic, as usual. Happy to see you guys. Excited to talk to y'all.
And I just want to give an early shout out to your vintage San Francisco CrossFit t-shirt, which I think probably has real value now. given that it is vintage and no longer in production.
Tens of dollars.
It's worth tens of dollars on
Tens of
eBay.
Tens on eBay. Amazing.
And it's probably the last of the boys husky as well. So
So we obviously have met before and know you well, but I'm going to go ahead and let you tell everyone listening to this sort of the backstory of how Josh and the Starettes became connected as humans.
yeah. Well, I think it was recently after the Becoming a Supple Leopard came out, and Kelly was making the rounds and came out to Davis Monthan to talk to our pararescue team. I was the flight surgeon. I had been a PJ for 12 years under the old school system where when you got injured, they gave you a bottle of 800 Motrins, a bag of ice, and said, come back in 3 days and get back to it. And Kelly came in and really kind of blew our mind. It was the first time we had ever learned. I think that was probably the first time I've heard the word mobility. I always said stretching. And then it's funny because you get that first taste of Kelly and you're like, is this guy completely crazy or have I been missing all of this?
whole room is
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
come in.
And
Thanks,
the
guys.
answer to that question is yes, Josh.
Yes, of course. And so I can give you an 11-year, because I think that was about 11 years ago. I can give you an 11-year testimonial in search of becoming a supple leopard. It's in my daily routine. I can't say I've ever been pain-free in those 11 years, but knowing how to how to diagnose and how to treat myself was probably one of the best gifts I've ever got. So thank you, Kelly, for that. I certainly would not be where I am today without your guidance. So thanks for that.
Everyone, Josh
and
is
how do
actually
we-
memorialized in our 60 Minutes piece, believe it or not.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Back out there. That's right.
Yeah, that was cool. Well, interesting too, because you're a physician and, I think maybe people think that physicians are all knowing about all things.
That's true.
And I find it so interesting that, you were already a working and well-trained physician at that time. And you're like, wait, whoa, like I just learned how to take care of my body in a way that I did not learn in medical school.
Right. It, when you say it's like the service manual for your body, it's such an appropriate statement, and it fits, and everybody should be able to take care of themselves, on a basic level. And I think really that's where people are missing these days. And you don't have to be a physician to understand becoming a supple leopard, but it helps, and that's where I think you guys nailed it with the new book, right? Because it breaks it down and it's like anybody can follow it. I read it and I'm like, this is the secret sauce. This is how we get people doing this stuff.
Josh, you were a user. You're a PJ, went to med school. And we'll talk about that funny intersection right on the border of med school, PJ. I think is interesting. You become senior flight surgeon, right? The man. Then you transition, and sort of each one of these transitions is an order of magnitude. Now tell us what you're doing now. And the reason this is relevant in this conversation, because you see the challenges being on the pointy tip of the spear, the user, and the person in charge of the system. So tell us sort of what you're doing now for work. And I think that'll set up the framework for some of the nuance I think that we could all benefit from.
Yeah. So now I am the chief of emergency medicine at the Southern Arizona VA. About 5 years ago, I was presented an opportunity to run the emergency department at the VA. And this was about the time when the Phoenix VA was getting all the bad press, right? People were dying because they weren't able to get in to see the physicians at the VA. And, in typical Josh fashion, I said, somebody should do something about that. And then this opportunity presented itself. And I said, well, I can complain about it or I can do something about it. And it's really given me an awesome opportunity to get involved and see, what's going on at the VA and how it works. And I guess I should give the disclaimer that the guests on the Ready State podcast do not necessarily represent those of the VA or the government in general. So I'm no spokesperson. I am not a paid spokesperson for the VA. I'm a guy that works there. But they really have done some great things over the last few years. Congress has helped. They've stepped in. They've passed some bills, the CARE Act, the PACT Act, that said, hey, if we can't get to see you within 30 days, you have the opportunity to go out into the community and get the care you need. And I thought that was fantastic, right? We should be competing for veterans business. You shouldn't have to go there because that's your only option. But what we found was that people were going to the community, and the community was saying, hey, we can't see it for 90 days. And so patients were coming back to the VA. And so I've been a part of that, and it's been really interesting to watch and see how it's developing. And I think the VA has a great model. I think there's certainly still work that needs to be done. It's what's called a capitated system. Maybe getting in the weeds here, but the VA is paid per person, not so much a fee for service model, which is great because then they're incentivized to create healthy people, not just treat them when they become complex medical problems, right? So they're invested in making sure people are healthy. And so they've come out with some great programs, the whole health program. There's dietary guidance. There's all kinds of resources for veterans to try and keep them healthy. And I think they stumble a little bit because each VA is a little bit different, but on a national level, like the pieces are there that really could have a benefit. And then, the question is, how do you turn that into a national program? Because it is expensive. And then, your limitations are, of course, that you run out of resources.
You're catching veterans now theoretically potentially after service. You had that benefit of being in pararescue, which you should define for us in a second. But let's say that you're in the Air Force, you're going around rescuing people and doing gnarly kind of heroic rescue. Then you're in charge of the care. When you look back, is there any sense of continuity of care? Because sometimes you can see things in leadership at the end of the tunnel that you could not have anticipated at the front of the tunnel. And is there a feedback mechanism for you to say, hey, let's really pay attention to this much earlier? Because I feel like sometimes Juliet and I work, with young athletes who are just lop off of their arm and that grows back the next day and they can do whatever they want. And I'm like, you don't understand. We've seen the end of your athletic career and we think we can extend it and prevent a lot of harm if you do these things. And we have that benefit of seeing both ends of the spectrum here. Have you had the same experience?
No. What really happens is that, you're active duty or you're involved, you're in the military, you're serving. And there's still, I retired in 2020, so I've been out for a while, but I imagine it's still kind of a similar mindset, is that, you don't want to be broke. You want to keep going, especially with pararescue, these high speed career fields. You want to just keep going. And so you kind of bury things, which is probably a lot like, the young athletes, right? You just drive on and then you get out and then you say, okay, now I need to start taking care of myself, which is what happened to me. Like I ignored it for so long and then I got out and I was like, okay, now it's time for me to start working on this stuff. And so I don't know how you square that circle with saying, hey, this is important to do now. Part of it is the fear of losing the ability to do your job. And I think we've made great strides in the military, pararescue,
Air Force
and
particularly.
the whole Guardian Angel weapon system. When I was a PJ or pararescue specialist. So for those that don't know, Air Force Pararescue is the combat search and rescue component of the Air Force. They were kind of born in World War II, but really kind of got their their name in Vietnam when they would rescue down pilots going down the helicopter in the force penetrator, uh, and have been involved with just about every high level rescue mission since Vietnam. So it's a high demand, high stress environment where people work. And when I went through, it was, you get injured, you come off, even if you try and work through it. But if you can't, then you go see the flight surgeon who gives you a bottle of Motrin and a bag of ice and says, come back in 3 weeks. And I think starting back when we met, Kelly, this was kind of when we had the transition, and pararescue became its own career field with some other, battlefield airman career field. And then it was designated its own weapon system. And with that weapon system, they created a maintenance program, right? Somebody, I don't know who it was, but came up with the great line, Guardian Angel is the only weapon system without a maintenance program.
Love it.
And so with that came all of the funds and all of the training. And so now there's physical therapists, there's chiropractors, there's sports medicine physicians, all helping keep this weapon system up and running.
Okay, so I have to ask, as someone who doesn't totally understand all the military language, by weapon system, do you mean a bunch of humans who are doing things and they themselves are the weapon system? Is that what you mean?
That's a great question. I can understand why that's confusing. So most weapon systems are considered like aircraft or tanks, right? Like a piece of machinery that needs maintenance, right? You got all the maintenance crews that work on the jets and the tanks. But we got a designation for the Guardian Angel weapon system. And so we got the maintenance program to go along with it.
That makes sense. That's so interesting.
I think I don't know if I completely understood that nuance.
Yeah.
But
I
understood what you were saying. What I'm saying is, it's really funny that that's how we finally wrapped our heads around, understanding that this was a finite resource, that we really are some of our most veteran, experienced, PJs were not able to deploy and do their job because their back hurts.
It would go without saying that you would maintain the jet. Right.
That's right.
But that it took a second to be like, wait a second. Like we actually have to maintain the humans in the same way.
Throughout some of the armed forces, where people started assigning a number to the training. So Josh, we have $1.7 million invested in your training. And so that's why we should keep you in the field. So I love that we've basically made humans numbers and like systems. And then we're like, okay, now we can do the right thing for the right reason, which is great.
Yeah.
Okay, so I would love to just rewind a bit on your career, and I have 50 questions about what you're currently doing at the VA and what you're seeing, which I'd like to get to in a little bit. But before we do that, I would like to just rewind a little bit, and thank you for the explanation about what a pararescue person does, because I'm not sure most people actually know that. But tell us a little bit about your career. Did you join the Air Force and then go to medical school? Was it the other way around? And then I would like to tee you up to give a detailed background of a particular famous rescue that you were involved in, and tell everybody that story as well.
Okay, sure. So you guys know me fairly well, but I tend to do things the hard way. So I decided late in my college career that I wanted to go to medical school, and hadn't really failed at anything. So I was pretty confident that I would just apply and get into medical school. But it turns out you need things like good grades and high MCAT scores and some life experience to get into medical school. And so I didn't get in, and I found myself kind of wondering what I was going to do with my life. And then I just kind of stumbled across this thing called pararescue.
Wow.
And this was before the internet. This was in the early 90s. And I got this brochure that had a picture of this guy in this maroon beret and, looking all tough. And it said, skydiving and scuba diving and shooting guns and emergency medicine. And I was like, that sounds cool. Sign me up. And I'm like, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And so after
Josh, meet the pipeline.
I know, right? After graduating from college pre-med, I enlisted in the Air Force, much to the chagrins of my parents. That was an interesting conversation. Because usually, you go to college and if you join the military, you become an officer, kind of the frontline leaders. But I wanted to be in pararescue because they were like frontline guys. They were the guys doing the job. And I like to make the distinction that it was in the early 90s. And so, there was not a lot going on. The world was fairly stable. And so admittedly, I went in and I joined pararescue because I thought it would be cool and it would be a great experience. But then once I got into it, just like any of the special operations jobs, there's a selection which has about a 90% attrition rate. And they just basically torture you for 12 weeks to include a lot of water work, a lot of breath holding exercise, and just learning to be comfortable in uncomfortable situations, right? Because it's expensive. It takes a lot of money to send somebody through the pararescue pipeline, and they want to make sure that you can handle yourself under pressure, because you will be sent into some high stress situations. And through that, I learned and just really came to appreciate the sacrifice of others, the teamwork of others, and the things that people have done before me that I didn't really know about when I signed up, to be this cool guy in a maroon beret on the cover of a pararescue poster. And so with that, I think I matured into, somebody that really enjoyed serving others, right? So it was kind of probably my first foray into service, and it stuck with me, and it's continued throughout my life. There's been a backbone of service which continues at the VA.
Did you like the medicine part? Because it's one thing to
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm wrong, correct me here, but one of the things that happens out of pararescue is that you had so much advanced military medical training, like ER medicine, literally ER medicine, that isn't that part of the genesis of the whole physician's assistant program, that we realized we had people who weren't even doctors but literally could prescribe, handle car accidents that happened with airplanes and in wars. I mean, this is the first kind of big dose of medical training you had, and you liked it, or you were so far into the pipeline that you could not like it.
So that was part of what drew me to pararescue, right? Because it's combat search and rescue, whereas SEALs are more search and destroy. I really liked that aspect of it, of going in and helping people, rescuing down pilots or whatever. And pararescue does a lot of civilian work as well. And so all of the high risk rescues in Alaska or high angle rescues done in Arizona or anywhere long distance, out to sea rescues, pararescue is usually involved because they have the greatest capability. But underlying all of that is the medical treatment that you learn, the medical skills that you have, because it doesn't do you any good if you get to somebody and then you can't treat them. So that was really what brought me to pararescue. All that other stuff sounded fun, but it was the underlying medicine that drew me to it.
And then did you, after you do the pararescue training, you go to medical school, but you're still in the Air Force? Is that how that worked out?
Me personally?
Yeah.
You're talking about me specifically, right? Because like I said, I tend to do things the hard way. So I did a stint of active duty and then decided that I really wanted to be a doctor still. It gave me 5 years to kind of reflect on my life and what I wanted to do. And I was grateful for the experience in active duty, but realized that, I still want to be a doctor. And so I had gained a little maturity and some focus. And so I got out of active duty and went to a reserve pararescue team and went back to school. I went to the University of Arizona and then ultimately got into medical school at the University of Arizona. And that's where I
Dude,
went.
I have to just pause here for a second. Your 21-year-old self applying to med school, your 26-year-old self who's been around the block once, actually has some skills. How asymmetrical was your preparation to the other fellow students? They must have thought you were just an alien who already also knew how to work in a team and wasn't freaked out by blood and could handle not sleeping for days at a time. I mean, it must have been really a shock that you're like, wow, I think every doctor could really stand to do this before she became a physician.
Yeah, I I remember the first couple of weeks sitting in class, like looking around, just giggling to myself that they're teaching me to be a doctor. I was like, because I had just such an appreciation for the effort that it takes to get in, um, and some of my classmates, they're right out of college. They're these young kids. None of them, some of them probably hadn't even seen blood before, right? They're just academically very smart and very driven and like stepwise. They're like high school, college, med school, residency. Uh, but I brought an experience and I brought a different mindset to it that I wouldn't trade. Like I tell people, if I could go back in time and get into medical school or not get into medical school, I tell people like not getting into medical school is probably the best thing that ever happened to me.
Okay.
I have to tell you a quick story that I think will probably resonate you as being a slightly older graduate student. But before Kelly went to PT school, he had to take some units to just finish up some, he had to finish up some undergraduate units in order to be able to actually go to PT school. And one of the classes he had to take was a speech class that he took at City College of San Francisco. And, obviously Kelly is good at speech, as one can imagine. And at that time, he was like 27 years old, and he gets into this class with actual 18-year-olds, which is even funnier now
Yeah.
that we think we have an 18-year-old daughter. And he had to take this speech class, and kids were like terrified of giving a 2-minute speech, and people are so afraid of public speaking, and Kelly just had to like check this box. But that was like a really weird experience for him, being sort of an adult student and having to go through this thing with a bunch of children.
I had that like
Yeah.
organic chemistry class
Yeah.
to, and that woman's like, you, the girl, you live with a woman.
Yeah.
I was like, okay. And then even in PT
Kelly's
school,
like, wow, I'm already 100
I
years
think
old.
I was in PT school. People hadn't voted yet. So, we're
Yeah.
getting in that direction.
They're going to do their first voting. Okay. So
Yeah.
I think
I was same boat.
yeah.
Sorry.
2 questions here. First of all, what is the craziest thing you did in pararescue training that like a civilian person like me would be like, wow, that's crazy, number 1. And then number 2, I do want to tee you up again to tell the story about Marcus Luttrell. Kelly and I obviously know the entire thing start to finish and are consumers of all of it. But my guess is many of our listeners have no idea who Marcus Luttrell even is.
Yeah. Okay. Craziest thing. I don't know if I can pick out a crazy.
Like, are you guys like jumping off of that, high dive that's like 5 times bigger than the Olympic high dive? Like, what are you doing that is insane? There has
So
to
that
be
was
some things.
that's funny that you mentioned that because that was more of a summer job than an actual pararescue training. I did that before pararescue. I was actually a high diver in a circus, a German circus, but that's probably for another podcast.
What? Kelly just died.
No, I know,
Kelly
I know
just-
that.
You already knew that
Oh,
about
yeah.
him?
Dude, the depths of Josh, you guys. Josh is the guy who finally convinced me to start making my own kombucha. Like
Oh, yeah.
Josh is a
That's
user
true. We thank you.
fighting,
We thank you for
fighting
that.
for the users. Okay.
We thank you for that. Okay. Wow. Okay. I mean, forget about the
Okay.
pararescue class.
Okay, so
German high diver.
German. Let me go back to the pararescue thing.
Okay.
So we have, or I don't know if they still do it, but Hell Night, like they do, where they really try and get people to question their motivation, and so it's just 24 hours of torture. But we did this thing called bobbing, which I know you guys are probably familiar with, but this is the pararescue version of it, where you actually take scuba tanks, the Twin 80 scuba tanks that are filled with lead shot, and you put those on your back in a 18-pound weight vest, and your fins, and you swim or you walk backwards down to the deep end of the pool, and then you bob, right? So you jump up, you swim up, you take a breath, and then you sink back down. And then you have to take your fins off and you put them on your hands. So then you can push and you can pull down and break the surface. So I'm like 5'7" on a good day. So I'm really struggling. And, with the fatigue and everything, I'm not getting to the surface. And so I miss a breath, and then I'm like trying to stay calm, right? Because you're strapped to a bunch of weights and you're lacking oxygen. And so the second time I push up, I really push and I really pull, and I almost break the surface of the water. Right. And so I'm looking down the line, we're all on a line, and I see people bailing out, like pulling off their safety strap, and like just quitting. And I'm like, I am not quitting. And so I try it again. And so this is my third breath, and I'm already fatigued. And there is a pool light. This was in the middle of the night. And so there was like a pool light that I was looking at. And I'm like, well, I know there's people watching me. And so I'm not going to quit. And so I just kind of sat down and looked at the light and literally like went to the light. Your peripheral vision, when you become oxygen deprived, starts to narrow, and it literally was like turning off an old-fashioned TV, right? That it got smaller, and then boop, and I was out. And then the next thing I know, I'm getting slapped in the face on the side of the pool. Appel, you know where you are? I'm like, I'm like, hoo-yah, Sergeant, because that's how you answer everybody. Hoo-yah, Sergeant. You know where you are? Yeah, hoo-yah, Sergeant. You want to quit? Negative, Sergeant. All right, get back in the pool. Hoo-yah, Sergeant. I got back in the pool, and luckily I was able to get a breath, and then we ended the exercise. But that was always one of my favorite stories.
This episode of the Ready State podcast is also brought to you by our friends at Yeti. And what we want to talk to you about today is sort of our favorite summer Yeti product, and that is the Yonder bottle.
We just traveled, and we've been begging Yeti for a long time. Can you please make us a light backpacking, shatterproof, great sort of poly bottle that isn't a metal bottle? Because if I don't have a lot of volume, I don't drink water.
You don't drink any water
I
at
don't
all.
drink any water. But so this thing starts to become like 5 pounds of insulated steel, and I don't want to take that. Backpacking straight up in Norway with this 1.5 liter bottle was a killer.
Yeah, and I mean, it is made of 50% recycled plastic and is super easy and lightweight to travel with. And, we've used it in outdoor pursuits like rafting and backpacking, but also just on everyday trips where you have to, put an empty bottle in your backpack before you go through TSA. Like, this thing is awesome to travel with.
Yeah, it's my favorite travel bottle for sure. I've been throwing it in my kayak. I can clip it onto stuff. The Yonder solves a big problem for us.
Yeah, huge fans of this. If you want to go and check out the Yonder bottle and maybe pick up one, go to thereadystate.com/Yeti. So you shallow water blackout, you get slapped awake, and then you're strapped back onto the heavy weights and put back in the pool. That's amazing.
We got so a couple things. One is that you're only my second friend who's drowned in a pool during military training.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'll say is, we were approached to do a TV show a minute ago, and they were like, hey, here's the premise. You can take all these world-class athletes, and then we're going to see if you can break them. And we're going to take them to do these crazy things. And I was like, I don't think you understand how this works. There's no off button. I was like, in fact, the premise is that you're going to see injuries and people will die and drown. And I said, because at some point you're so tired or you're so willful that there's no mental off button. You just go until literally you can't go. And I'm like, have you ever seen the woman rolling through the finish line of a marathon, or the triathlon where she's rolling and she can't walk and she's pooed herself and she's like, I'm going to finish. I'm like, you want a TV show of that? And they were like, oh, you're good point.
Canceled.
There's no off button. And there you go.
Canceled.
Apparently there is an off button, but it's called your brain. Right. And that is a perfect tee up.
The thing about it is, if you just relax, like it was such a calming experience. Like, there was no panic. Like, you get past kind of the hunger for air and the guppying, and you just kind of go with it, right? It's the
Every once in a while,
CO2, the
That's
CO2
definitely
buildup.
one way to look at it,
Juliet,
Josh.
I'm trying to keep up with Juliet on the
was-
bike, and I'm just in pain. And what I think to myself is, this is my life now, and that's like this is just how it is, and I'm gonna just
Yeah.
suffer, and
Yeah.
that must be the same thing. Like, this is my life now. I'm on the bottom of the pool. This is Josh. I hope someone tells my mom.
I'm out. Bye.
I'm out. Josh out. Apple
Okay.
out.
So you end up going to med school, and then you have a little break, I think, and you end up going back to I think it's Afghanistan on a little break from med school. Is that right? Do I have that right?
Summer vacation. Yeah, it is. And I should have never been there. So I started med school in August of 2001. And I loved being a PJ. And I loved medicine. And so I was a reserve PJ when I got into medical school. And I had this dilemma. I'm like, do I quit being a PJ and just focus on medical school, or can I do both? And I decided that I was single at the time, and I don't think I even owned a house plant. So I said, I'm going to stay in the reserves. I'm going to be a PJ and go to med school. I'm going to work my way through med school. And that was right at the end of my enlistment. So I re-enlisted September 9th, 2001.
Wow. What time?
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that great? I was like, what could go wrong? So that was a Sunday, I believe. And I was at my training, my military training. I raised my hand and swore my oath to the Constitution. And then September 11th happened. And I, like everybody, right? Everybody that was old enough right now, it's been so long that people don't remember it. But people were angry. And I was like, let's go, let's do this. Right. And so I was ready to quit med school and go back and just be a full-time PJ. I had a skill set that I anticipate was going to be needed relatively shortly. And I'd been training for this for a long time, and it was time to go to work. We ended up getting activated and sent to Turkey, because at the time we were protecting the no-fly zone over Iraq. And so this was early on, before Afghanistan had even kicked off, and we got activated. And my teammates, right, and this really speaks to pararescue and the kind of the brotherhood that it creates. My teammates realized how hard I'd worked to get into med school. And they came to me at a team meeting, and they're like, why don't you stay back, stay in school, train up the other PJs, and send them over, and just stay in school. And I'll never forget that, because that meant, more deployments for them, time away from their family. And that was, their sacrifice for me. And that really struck a chord with me. And I didn't like that feeling where I felt like somebody else was picking up my slack. And so 2005, I was graduating from med school, May 13th. And we got activated again, this time to Afghanistan in 2005. It was going down pretty good there in Afghanistan. And I said, I graduate May 13th. I'm available May 15th, because my folks were coming out to visit. And so I volunteered to go to Afghanistan right after medical school, again, as an enlisted PJ. And so I had a special name tag made up that said Master Sergeant Josh Appel, MD, and it really confused people. And so I ended up in Afghanistan 2005 for my summer vacation between med school graduation and the beginning of my internship. And so I was in Kandahar, and I walked over to the military hospital, and I said, hey, I'm a doctor. Can I help out? And nobody checked I guess they just took my word for it. They saw my name tag. It said MD.
Yeah, like it says
sure,
MD.
come
it's
in,
good.
right? And so it was amazing, because I really got really the only experience that you can only get as a wartime physician. Some of the most brutal um, conditions that a physician can find themselves in, and that was really a good introduction to my into my medical career. Uh, and so I did the rotation. I was packing up my stuff, and like I had packed up all of my gear, and we were ready to go. It was June 28th, and I was supposed to start my internship first week of July. So cutting it a little close. So I'm packing up all of my gear,
And
and
wait,
kind
just
of
pause for a second.
yeah.
Where
Sorry.
is your internship, and how is working as a physician in a war zone not an internship? You get no credit for that?
Yeah.
Like, that's just like, people are like, oh, look, you have a little side hustle. That's cute.
So my internship was at the University of Arizona, and the intern serves two purposes. One is learning how to be a doctor. The other is doing all of the crappy scut work for all the other doctors in the hospital, right? It's kind of how you learn how to be a doctor, is that kind of trial by fire. And so, yeah, I was getting the experience, but the hospital wasn't getting the, indentured servitude that the intern provides. And so like I said, I'm packing up my gear. My head is already, back in Arizona, and I'm thinking about my internship, and, picturing something somewhere between Scrubs and ER, those TV shows. When I get this call on the radio that, hey, we need all rescue personnel to the command center. And I walk in, and I can tell right away that something is gone horribly wrong. You can just feel the tension in the air. And we got briefed that a military helicopter had just been shot down. There were 16 people on board, and we don't know the status of them, and we need to go now. So I pulled all my gear out of the storage unit and got it on, got my head back in the game, and we flew up north to Bagram Air Force Base. We were briefed there that the 16 on board the helicopter were all presumed dead. And they had been struck by a rocket-propelled grenade, but that they had been searching for a 4-man SEAL team that was still missing, and it was now our job to go find them. And that was the first I had heard of Operation Red Wings, and that was the mission that Marcus Luttrell and Mike Murphy and his teammates were on. And so we searched and didn't find anything for a couple of days. And then on the 2nd of July, we got a note that was hand delivered by a village elder to one of the Marine fire bases, and it was from one of the SEAL team members, Marcus Luttrell. It said he was alive and he was being cared for in this village, but that he needed medical attention and the Taliban were closing in. And so we launched on that mission and picked him up that night. And he, I won't go in all the details, but I was the team leader, the pararescue team leader on that mission. And we flew into, enemy territory and got him out. And then he told us, the fate of the rest of his teammates, and that they had all been killed. And he was, in fact, the lone survivor of that mission. But he told us where his teammates were located. And in the movie, they never mentioned this. One of the things I really didn't like about the movie. But on the 4th of July, we went back in, and that's when we recovered Michael Murphy and Danny Dietz. There was another teammate, Matt Axelson, who was recovered a few days later. But on the 4th of July, that was the mission where I really thought we were going to be killed. They knew we were coming. They knew where the bodies were. We had just snatched the lone survivor from under their noses, and that's when I really felt like we were going to be shot down. I often thought about Pat Tillman and how that was kind of a tragic story. This was before we kind of knew what happened, but along that same lines that, Air Force PJ team, whatever, goes in and after rescuing Navy SEAL gets shot down and killed on the 4th of July. I thought I thought it would have made a good movie, but I didn't want to star in that one.
So,
And
just in
so,
case people haven't heard, this whole event was made into a movie starred by Mark Wahlberg called Lone Survivor, which we actually just randomly rewatched with our kids because we'd mentioned something about it to our kids, and maybe it was because we'd just spoken to you and knew we were going to podcast with you, but
And Murph, it just happened.
yeah. So, we actually watched it with our kids because we were like, you need to know about this. But yeah, I mean, did you overall feel good about the way that story was told? I mean, I actually didn't. I think I did vaguely know about you guys going in after, but other than that sort of missing piece of the story, which is a pretty big missing piece. But how did you feel about the movie?
I had mixed feelings about the movie. Peter Berg did a great job with the team stuff, with the SEAL team, and really that's the important part. So overall, I thought it was a great movie. It was a great depiction. All of the action scenes, all of the wounds that the teammates incurred were actually from the autopsy reports. So that was all really true to life. And Marcus was on-scene advisor, and so I think he literally threatened Peter Berg. He said, "If you make my guys look stupid, I'll kill you." So that may have been some of the motivation.
Fair enough. That's fair.
Yeah.
The rescue portion, the part that depicts my role, was a little cheesy, but it's not about me. It was about the team, and I think they did a great job with the team stuff. My biggest pet peeve is that if you watch, the guy that plays me in the movie walks out of the helicopter and he's got this big shiny carabiner on his sit harness, like right in front of his junk, and I'm like, why would you put a big shiny object, where people are shooting at you to highlight that area? Not something I would do.
Also,
those
So when
little
if
details.
you look at
super
it,
reasonable.
if you watch it again, look for the big shiny carabiner, and you're like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Well,
So,
it's
I mean,
to highlight your manhood. That's really what
you
it
know,
comes down to.
obviously we've been part of the CrossFit community basically since the very beginning, and know that the famous workout that is done by tens of thousands of
I
people
just saw
across the world.
Murph Badge at the airport yesterday.
Yeah, is in honor of Mike Murphy, who died during that mission. And tell us a little, maybe for people who've never heard of it, and what that is, and what's that about, and why people do it on Memorial Day and so forth.
Yeah. So when I started my internship, I was excited that we had done the mission and glad that we got Marcus back and all that. But it was
Let me
just
pause.
such a
Did you have any time to process that whole thing, or literally
You
you were
just get on a
like,
plane and you're like, now
like
I'm in
high
my
five.
scrubs.
now I'm back.
Yeah, you're like now in.
University of
Yeah.
Arizona.
yeah.
Wow.
Just jump, like a good way to avoid things is jump into a 80-hour work medical internship. Right. No real processing. I don't know. I don't know. So when I'm stressed and I tend to just dive in and do stuff. So it actually worked out okay for me until it didn't. And then I worked through it, but it seemed like the thing to do. But I remember just having, right, because all of his teammates were killed, plus 16 people on the helicopter were killed. And, it was such a sense of loss, and it seemed like it was kind of for nothing. And that's when I started doing CrossFit. It was actually 2006 when I started doing CrossFit to kind of augment my jiu-jitsu stuff, and really liked it. And then I was in Albany, New York at the time. And there was, in 2006, 2007, there was maybe a handful of hero wads. And I remember looking up at the wall and seeing Murph. And I was like, I wonder if that's the same Murph that I recovered. And I did some research, and sure enough, it was. And so I told Jason Ackerman, who was the owner of CrossFit, Albany CrossFit. I said, hey, we should do something on Memorial Day. And we did a hero wad workout. And I remember the shirt said, our pain for their sacrifice. And I did Murph, and other people did other hero wads. And it was awesome, right? Just the feeling, like Memorial Day for me would always end up just being drunk and depressed. But, it felt like I did something, right? Like I actually put forth some effort and thought about, not just Mike Murphy and those guys, but everybody that had paid the ultimate sacrifice and allowed us, this day of remembrance, and allowed us to have a barbecue and drink beer and not go to work. And so that really resonated with me. And I thought that this should be something that everybody does. And so the next year I had the entire box do Murph, and it was awesome. Just the synergy, the teamwork, it created the tribalism, where everybody's pulling for each other, and it was awesome. And then we ended up moving back to Arizona after my residency. And I thought that it would be a good thing to have as a national fundraiser, or at least a national event. And that's when I reached out to Mike Murphy's dad, Dan, and I said, hey, I got this idea of this Memorial Day event. It's called Memorial Day Murph. And I remember talking to Dan Murphy, and he's like, so you want to charge people to work out at their own gym and do Mike's workout? I was like, yes. He said, good luck with that, right? Because nobody was really doing that. Like there was what was it, Fight Gone Bad, or barbells for boobs or something. But it was kind of a new paradigm with fundraisers where you do your own, do it wherever. And that was kind of the start of it. And nothing other than a Facebook page and a directory of CrossFit boxes, right? It's kind of where it got its start, and it just took off. I think we had like 2,700 people the first year. And then the next year we had like 10,000. And Angie and I had just had twins. Well, she had just had twins, but we had newborn twins and a 2-year-old, and we're stuffing these T-shirts into envelopes for days on end. And she said, we are not going to do this again. And so that's when we handed it off to the guys at Forged. And Mike, who was an ex-SEAL himself, was a teammate of Mike Murphy. So it just kind of blended well. And they have now taken over kind of the general fundraiser. But the Memorial Day Murph tradition has certainly expanded well beyond CrossFit. People in police academies and fire academies and Boy Scouts and everywhere, people are doing it all over. So it has been just amazing for me to watch, and just an honor to be a part of it.
So cool.
I don't think enough people know the whole story. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
That's amazing. If we shift gears here for a second, psycho-emotional gears, you are suddenly a physician. You're going through this traditional physicianship. You're still attached to this pararescue wing.
Yep.
What places do you start to realize, maybe the Guardian Angels aren't quite on board yet as a fighting system? Are you able to come in and think differently about what you're doing because you have this different perspective? I mean, pararescue's been around for a minute, as you say. How does that change what you do in your day job, knowing sort of that aspect of it? And how do you take what you're learning in your day job and change, your pararescue experience?
That's a multi-tiered question.
Yep.
Yeah. What was that middle part again?
Well, just, you're suddenly having this, you've come through sort of looking at the care and feeding of people from a medical perspective. For me, I remember the moment where I was like, hey, I'm just putting out fires, and I'm wondering if there's something I can do to prevent fires. Do you ever have that experience as a physician? Because that's really the difference. Like I can just not know anything about Juliet. Juliet comes into my table. I get Juliet sorted, out of pain, less pain, functional again, kick her back out into the world. But then after I've seen Juliet 10 times, I'm like, what's going on with Juliet? It's like,
Yeah.
what is there something I can do to prevent this or change the system? Do you feel like there's any agency there, or do you start to become aware of that?
So this brings us back to when you and I met. Until we met, I had never thought about that. I was solely, as the flight surgeon, my job was to get folks back to their job, right? Mostly it's the paperwork and some recommendations on training and what to do. But until you and I crossed paths and you came out for that first seminar, there was no root cause analysis, right? It was all reactionary. It was all, I got this, how do I get better? Right? None of it was proactive. And I think we're having that same revelation with healthcare in general now, right? Healthcare now is so reactionary. But how do we put out the fires? Or how do we prevent the fires, right? Because right now we're just putting out fires and we're getting paid to put out fires.
So much the DNA of our work has come from me. We just said this on another podcast, working with the Navy, but so much of the DNA of understanding the realities of what people are asked to do with their bodies, and that we can't have these perfect situations and scenarios. So how do we get 100% of 50%? That's really what I'm like. If we can only assume 50% of the thing, let's make sure we're getting the full 50%. And even, we made 1,000 videos of a top-down setup for how most people set up when they pick something up. And then we started really looking at the Olympic lifting, being like, oh, they're all doing bottom-up setups. And I remember I asked you all, like, what's your number one problem? And you're like, guys tweak their backs getting the litter out of the helicopter. And I remember being in the helicopter and being like, you can't stand up in this helicopter. And everyone's like, no. And we had to show people how to organize the best of their ability to get into the most robust positions from a full weird squat, grabbing a litter. And just those ideas of saying, what can we control? How do we optimize for the best positions in the worst positions? That really, those were such important lessons for me, even though, you thought I was there for you. I was learning a lot at the same time. But I mean, it really was. You guys didn't have barbells. You had just gotten like some early stuff, and guys were just thinking differently about it.
Yeah, right. And it's not so much how do you lift in that awkward situation, but how do you set your back up, with what you're doing in the gym or what you're doing in your daily routine, right? Because I don't have to tell you, but just like lifting the litter doesn't cause a problem, it exposes the problem.
That's right.
I think I got that from you, by the way.
TM.
So, you
plagiarizing real time.
You touched on this a little bit, but and this may be a podcast in and of itself. But do you think the sort of approach to medicine being reactionary, do you think that is starting to change from a philosophical standpoint? I mean, it's so ingrained in how our current medical system is set up. And if so, in what ways is it changing? Who's changing it? Is it still just, 0.01% of physicians like you and, some other sort of forward-thinking physicians that are thinking this way? Like, are you still in the extreme minority, or do you think there's starting to be a bit of a change in philosophy and, maybe starting to rethink how we're doing this thing that is our medical system?
Short answer, yes. I think I'm still probably a 1%, but not a 0.1%, right? So there's optimism there. I think I see glimpses into the future that are promising. I tend to be an optimist. I feel like if after trying everything else, we will do what's right. I think if we give people the opportunity and the information, they will make the right choices. And then I read something about bed rot, and I'm not so sure I have the optimism anymore.
Fair enough.
Bed rot, like that's an actual thing that goes against everything that.
Oh,
anyway,
that sounds
kids.
terrible. Okay, so if my timeline is correct, you started your current role at the VA like 5 minutes before the COVID pandemic hit. Am I right? Am I right on that?
No, it was more than 5. It was at least 15. No, I had settled in. Let me come back to that, but just I wanted to finish on
totally interrupted
my optimism for healthcare. So I think like I said, the VA is a good model. I think if we can dial that in, like the capitated system where people are paid per patient and not per service, I think that helps with the motivation, because unfortunately, things are often motivated by money. Um, and the VA is doing a lot of things in that sense, like trying to be proactive. And there are certainly physicians that are out there that are doing that. I know Julie Fouché is one of those forward-thinking physicians. I've got a buddy of mine who's running a men's health clinic here in Tucson, who was actually my PJ teammate on the rescue mission, which
Amazing.
is a funny story. He was a trained cardiothoracic surgeon and saw all of the reactionary stuff. And he's like, I'm going to skip all of this stuff. And I'm going to try and get people before they need to have their valves replaced or before they need their bypass graft. So he's aggressively treating cholesterol. He's aggressively treating things before they become problems. And I think that's really where we need to go. It's just building the model that gets us there. And I think when I become Surgeon General, that may be something
Yes. Is that an ambition?
No, it's more of a joke. Because I'm not even sure what the Surgeon General does other than has a cool hat.
A cool title.
Well,
cool title.
Yeah. Chasing cool hats has gotten you into trouble. So
I know. I hear you.
Did you want to?
Oh,
And so you had another question that I cut off, and I'm sorry.
No, I just was. I mean, it
COVID,
sounded like
right.
I mean, you sort of took over. Again, I don't have the timeline perfectly right in my head, but I mean, you obviously were running this huge organization during the middle of a
head of
worldwide
ER departments.
head of the ER, and I think that this could be an entire podcast in and of itself. But maybe give us a little Reader's Digest version of what was that like for you on the ground.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and it really tested my leadership skills. Because clearly I'm not one to shy away from challenges, and I looked at COVID as a challenge, and I was like, yeah, this is go time. Let's do what we can. Let's help people. Right, we're the emergency department. Let's protect ourselves, but let's get in there and do stuff. And I charged up that hill, and I realized that I was kind of up there by myself, and that I had left some people behind because some people were a little more apprehensive than I was. And that was good for me personally, just to realize that not everybody's coming from the same perspective. But I think COVID was challenging in a number of ways. And it was, trying to keep people safe and being able to adjust on the fly. And really, those are two things that kind of my training has helped me with. But things were not moving quickly. And so in the emergency department, we tend to jump in and do what we can based on the information we have, right? And then adjust as things come in. And I think what COVID really exposed is that we weren't getting those updates, and we were not able to flex real time when data changed and when we got more knowledge about stuff. So we were lagging, and this is America in general, or healthcare in general, dealing with COVID. As things changed, I felt like we weren't quite as flexible as we could have been. But really, the takeaway message that I got from COVID is, don't be fat and unhealthy, right? Like, talk about preventing fires. Like, now that we were a couple of years with some data, we can dissect it and backtrack it and see who really was the vulnerable with COVID. And those are people that were overweight and underlying medical conditions.
So it's super interesting you say that, because I think that started to become obvious pretty early on. And and yet, and I don't know if it was how the media handled it, or it's because it was out of an abundance of sensitivity for certain groups. But it's interesting because nobody really did or does talk about that, at least in public settings, and I was always so shocked. I mean, I think there were always a few small voices, but
maybe we were too close to the fire to
yeah, but
say,
if you just didn't looked in sort of the broader mainstream media, it was like, well, people almost felt like they couldn't say that that more people who were overweight and unhealthy were the ones dying. They felt like they
Yeah.
couldn't say that because it would offend people or was somehow
it's too late.
too late. I don't
The
know, but
intervention-
I did think, and I did and do still think it's a very weird thing. I mean, it's that you've even said it out loud is unusual, I think. Why do you think
Yeah,
that is? What was?
I I don't know. I have thoughts, but they're not helpful. Right?
Ozempic and ivermectin. That's really the
Yeah,
great
right?
stack.
I don't know. Like, we had data pretty early on, and the things that were being done, they don't. There's no logical explanation to me for it, right? As gym owners, you guys got shut down. Like, you were part of the solution,
Yeah.
and your business was shut down because it was non-essential.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know anything that would have been more essential.
Yeah,
than a
that
place
really
where you
did
can go
that slayed us on a like deep and existential level.
Well, I'll tell you,
I was like, wow, I'm at Costco right now with
Yeah,
a billion
right.
people
Urban Outfitters.
buying huge bags of Doritos, and that's essential. But my gym, which is large and aerated with garage doors, is not essential.
With some of the
it was hard
healthiest
for me
people
to
in the
square that.
community.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
really hard for me
Yeah,
to square that.
we learned that, and also that people need community. That
Yeah.
that when people did not do well when we pulled them out of their their friendships groups and their coping strategies groups. I mean, I think I think what's interesting is, to sum up a little bit of what I think you're both saying, is we haven't necessarily connected the dots on this experiment we ran,
Mhm.
that was thrust upon us, and looking at the interventions downstream of that. Now we're just back on the phones, back on the alcohol, back on the whatever it is that.
Yeah. Like, you'd think there'd just be some like national push towards saying, okay, like we got the data in from a pretty large experiment that
we lost a lot of people.
We lost a lot of people. And that was a horrible thing for families and communities, and like, hello, like, we need to focus a lot more attention on this particular thing, which is, people's actual health, and, rethinking our medical system. So it's not just reactionary, and, it's deep, but it just seems like we went back to like, okay, well, let's just have everybody
Yeah.
doing their thing.
I call it a teachable moment, right? Like, we have a huge teachable moment right now, and we're squandering it. Again, back to that Surgeon General thing. Like, are we not going to learn any lessons from this?
It's tough. It's tough from the top down. I think that's one of the things I recognized, standing in front of the senior Army medical leadership one time, that trying to change a tanker mid drive it takes a long time to make change. That it's a lot easier going and working with a unit, seeing just how the Air Force and the pararescue, for example, went out and hired incredible coaches. I'm talking about like Justin Schwind, who was just a genius, running the high performance, program there, just, being able to act nimbly at a community level. And that's really what, each squadron is, a community level versus acting at a national level. It's just much harder, even a global level. And it's why I think Juliet and I, one of the reasons I think with Built to Move, we really looked at, hey, this $1 trillion experiment we've been running in fitness hasn't served our communities. In fact, it's failed us. And we maybe need focusing on the wrong level of organizational change. And that we've really felt like the household, the dyad, the people who live together, that was really the only functional unit that mattered, the team, at that level. Fact. Josh.
So I do have a couple other questions. I mean, obviously COVID must have been a huge part of, your experience in the ER in recent years, but, what else are you seeing? Are you seeing trends, changes, anything sort of big about what's going on with people's health, writ large as you see it in the ER? And then I do have one more other specific question, but I'll let you take that.
We
one.
just don't have heads of ER departments on our podcast very often, so we want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's going on
What are
in
you
there?
seeing?
Well, lucky for me, people are still doing stupid things. So I have some pretty good job security. Like, people are still riding motorcycles and juggling chainsaws. So anyway, I in the VA, right? I see a lot of downstream effects, like even more than when I'm working at the trauma center at the university.
Is it like just like KAD, things like that, like ketoacidosis? Like you're just seeing that people are mismanaging their health? Is that what?
Right. That's it's a lot of it, right? And they come to us. So we're kind of a social safety net, and I love that about emergency medicine. Like we'll see anybody for anything, and sometimes that gets abused. But we're definitely the social safety net of the community, and I think we try and fight that, and I think our corporate leaders try and fight that. But when you don't have anything else, that's the place you go. And I love the fact that I never have to, check insurance or, are you qualified for that? Like, you're in my ED, I'm treating you. I don't care. But yeah, just the effects of the long-term abuse that we do to ourselves. And I think our generation is probably the first ones that will really start turning it around. But I see a lot of the older folks that have smoked and, not had the best diets and the diabetes. But I think it's our generation that's going to turn it around, and then our kids that are going to be the mutants that I'm curious to see. I know your girls are a number of years ahead of ours, but like what this generation is going to turn out to be, with all of the information and all of the stuff they know about health and durability, how that's going to work out.
Whatever, we invented Doritos in our generation. I'm with
Right.
you. I feel
TV
like
dinners and Dorito, like all of that stuff, and we got rid of the family garden, and that's not us. That's our parents.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's
right.
It happened to us. Dorito.
Yeah.
I feel like Doritos happened to me. Is that fair, Lisa?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually going to have Dan Buettner, the author of the Blue Zones. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he's going to be on the podcast. And, we've spent a lot of time sort of thinking about what it is about those, thinking and learning from him about what it is those communities all do to, produce a ton of centenarians. Right. And of course, it's like it's all the most basic stuff, including, strong, including and maybe most prime, like strong human connection and, connection with your immediate family. And so, hopefully our kids will start to get on that program a little bit and change some things.
Josh, besides being bit by a snake or cutting my arm off to come see you, are you on the socials? Can people follow you if they want to know more about your adventures?
Yeah, if you like what you're hearing, I'm on LinkedIn. If you don't like what you're hearing, I'm on Twitter as well.
Okay, wait. Kelly was trying to get to the end, though. I can't let you leave without one more question.
Oh, sorry.
And I'm sorry,
All right.
but Kelly and I are obsessed with Ozempic and all Ozempic-y things. And I just wanted to get your thoughts and your thoughts and opinions on it.
So as an ER doc, I don't really have a lot of interaction with it. I just it just feels like the latest shortcut. Like, just do the work.
Yeah, really powerful tool for people who need a really
are really
powerful
sick.
tool. Like we can get people. I think if we can get people to lose 25% of their weight, you're morbidly obese, decrease your fatty liver. That's a really first step intervention that maybe is better than gastric bypass.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
we've seen some friends taking, we'll just say Mexican off-brand Ozempic and not working in ERs and seeing people who have had negative downstream consequences from taking a suspect generic Ozempic.
So,
So,
and
like-
I would, go ahead.
I'm going to cut you off again. I'm sorry about that. As with anything, it has a purpose. I think it has moved beyond its purpose.
Yeah.
And I think the people that need it are now having a difficult time getting it.
That's right.
But it absolutely can help. But I think the majority, again, of people using it should probably just do the work.
Well, I feel like we may have to bring you back for a Josh Appel part 2, because I feel like there were a lot of subjects we didn't get to cover, like raising kids and standing desks in schools, and more on
Right.
longevity and durability,
Yeah.
and, you know,
Fermented tea.
fermented tea. I mean, you know,
Fermented tea.
there's a lot that we didn't have a chance to cover in this episode. So I hope maybe sometime later this year we can bring you back for Josh Appel Talks to the Starettes part 2.
That would be awesome. I do want to pitch my idea. I think it's going to be. I think it could be
Hit us.
epic. Hose flavored water.
Yes,
Right, a
like
little packet.
1970 summer.
Yeah, right. Like you pour the
Yes.
packet in, and then you drink the water, and it tastes like a hose, like a rubber hose.
Yes.
Wow.
It would.
That is a
It would be
key part of creating a 1970s summer for your kids, which I am a fan of.
It would
comes
be a
in
niche market, of course.
It
but
comes
you
in
know,
a
and
3-pack with a chia pet.
Yeah, but there also needs to be like a Tang. You have to have a Tang flavored, like it's a 3-pack with a Tang flavored.
You're not wrong. That's kind of
Yeah.
genius.
Yeah,
I was
maybe.
thinking we could put make an attachment to your water bottles that was actually like the end of a hose, so you get that metal taste.
Well,
with
and then somehow some kind of technology so that there's like 4 different temperatures that hit your mouth, because like you know,
Right.
the first part of the hose has been in the sun, so that water's
so
kind of
hot.
warm, and then it starts getting colder,
Wow.
right? Like a
Me too.
yeah.
That's
Yeah,
what
I'm so with you. You know, you and I have been
All right.
obviously having the same
I had
thoughts.
heat, not stroke, but like I had some pre-sunstroke kind of exposure problems in Germany as a kid, and I remember being like on the clay tennis courts, like I probably hadn't drinking, and like I'm drinking from that orange hose that they're using to spray down the tennis courts,
Mhm.
and like feeling like I'm gonna pass out, and I'm kind of nauseous, and then hitting that full warm hose.
Well,
So you
everybody's
guys have positive associations running around. I'm like, I still had to ride my bike home, and I remember even pulling under a tree and like passing out.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone's doing all this formal like resilience training now. And I think, man, if we
Yeah,
just like
right.
locked our kids outside, like made them stay outside for 12 hours in the summer, and we're like, drink from the hose, forage for food,
Get
good luck
nettles.
to you.
Yeah, I love
You know,
it.
we wouldn't need so much
Amazing.
resilience training.
Josh, tell us where you are. How can we find? Can we follow you
LinkedIn,
and your hose
Twitter.
water?
Yeah, LinkedIn. I think I'm just Josh Appel. I think I may have 7 followers. So
Perfect.
well,
anybody-
hopefully this
I'm not really big
podcast
on-
will get you up to
not
like
really
12.
big on the socials, but yeah, I know, right? I could double my. Not really big on the socials, but I'm
Well,
here for
as-
you guys
From
whenever.
dad girl to dad girl, thank you so much for girl dad, not dad girl dad to girl dad. Thanks so much for joining us, man. It's always appreciate your friendship and your candor and your view on this, and thanks for sharing your experience with our TRS family.
Awesome. Love you guys.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
We'll see ya.
Thank you for listening to the Ready State Podcast. If you like what you're hearing, check out all our episodes here or at thereadystate.com. And be sure to subscribe and leave a review on iTunes to help others find our show.
Check us out and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Ready State.
Until next time, cheers, everyone.
You got it. You better stop it.